These high school bullies thought they found the perfect victim to humiliate for social media fame. They picked the quietest, most timid teacher in Lincoln High School, thinking she'd be an easy target for their viral video scheme. What they didn't realize was that mild-mannered English teacher Emma Rodriguez was hiding a secret that would turn their world upside down in the most spectacular way possible. This woman had spent years in professional fighting cages, earning the nickname Silent Storm for her devastating ground game and lightning-fast submissions. When these teenagers pushed her past her breaking point, they discovered why some storms are the most dangerous when they're quiet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Rodriguez adjusted her reading glasses for the 100th time that morning as she organized lesson plans at her desk in room 204. At 29, she possessed the kind of understated presence that made her nearly invisible in faculty meetings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her oversized cardigan hung loosely over her small frame, making her appear even more diminutive than her 5'4" stature. The morning sunlight streaming through the classroom windows caught the dust motes dancing in the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere around her workspace. Lincoln High School buzzed with the familiar energy of a Tuesday morning in October. Students shuffled through hallways clutching coffee cups and phones, their conversations echoing off lockers painted in the school colors of blue and gold. Emma had been teaching here for just over a year, and she had perfected the art of blending into the background. Unlike her colleagues who commanded attention with booming voices and commanding presences, Emma spoke in soft tones that required students to lean forward to hear her. Her teaching style was gentle but effective, drawing students into literary discussions through thoughtful questions rather than dramatic presentations. The second period bell chimed through the intercom system, and Emma's advanced English students began filtering into the classroom. Among them was David Park, a junior who reminded Emma of herself at that age. He carried worn paperback novels in his backpack and often stayed after class to discuss character motivations in whatever book they were currently reading. David possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that often went unrecognized in the social hierarchy of high school, where athletic prowess and social media followers seemed to matter more than academic achievement. As students settled into their seats, Emma noticed the usual dynamic playing out. The popular students claimed the center of the classroom like territorial animals, while students like David gravitated toward the edges, hoping to avoid unwanted attention. Emma had observed this pattern in every school where she'd taught, but Lincoln High seemed particularly divided between the social elite and everyone else. Tyler Brooks swaggered into the classroom 3 minutes after the bell, his Letterman jacket unzipped to reveal the expensive athletic wear underneath. At 6'2" with the broad shoulders of a varsity football player, Tyler commanded attention wherever he went. His blonde hair was styled with the kind of precision that suggested significant time spent in front of mirrors, and his confident smile revealed teeth straightened by years of orthodontic work. Tyler had the kind of natural charisma that drew followers, though Emma suspected his popularity stemmed more from fear and social status than genuine likability. Following closely behind Tyler was Madison Wells, his girlfriend and Lincoln High's head cheerleader. Madison's platinum blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her outfit pushed the boundaries of the school dress code without technically violating it. She had mastered the art of looking innocent while harboring a cruel streak that she deployed with surgical precision against anyone she deemed beneath her social station. Her laugh tinkled like wind chimes, but Emma had noticed how that same laugh could turn sharp and cutting when directed at the wrong target. The third member of their trio was Jake Martinez, Tyler's best friend and self-appointed documentarian. Jake carried himself with the nervous energy of someone desperate to maintain his position in the social hierarchy through association with more popular friends. He constantly filmed everything on his phone, convinced that he was on the verge of creating viral content that would launch his career as a social media influencer. His camera roll was filled with hundreds of videos that had garnered maybe dozens of views, but his optimism remained undaunted. Emma began her lesson on character development in classic literature, using examples from the novel they were currently reading. She moved quietly around the classroom, her voice barely rising above conversational level as she guided students through analysis of complex themes. This teaching approach required students to focus intently, eliminating the possibility of side conversations or distractions. Most students responded well to this method, finding themselves drawn into deeper thinking than they experienced in more traditional lecture-style classes. Tyler, however, seemed determined to disrupt the classroom's peaceful atmosphere. He made exaggerated gestures of confusion whenever Emma asked questions, as if her soft-spoken delivery was somehow incomprehensible. When she turned to write on the whiteboard, he would whisper comments to Madison and Jake that were just loud enough to be disruptive, but too quiet for Emma to address directly. His behavior walked the fine line between overt disrespect and plausible deniability, a skill he had perfected over years of testing teacher boundaries. Emma noticed Tyler's behavior but chose not to engage. She had learned early in her teaching career that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when dealing with students who clearly wanted to provoke a reaction. Instead, she continued her lesson with unwavering calm, occasionally making eye contact with Tyler in a way that acknowledged his presence, without giving him the confrontation he seemed to crave. During a quiet moment when students were working independently, Tyler raised his hand with exaggerated enthusiasm. Emma approached his desk, maintaining the same gentle demeanor she showed all her students despite sensing the trap being set. "Miss Rodriguez," Tyler said, using the formal address with mock seriousness, "I'm having trouble understanding this character's motivation. Could you explain it again, but maybe speak up a little? It's hard to hear you from back here." The request seemed reasonable on the surface, but Emma recognized the subtle mockery in Tyler's tone. Madison covered her mouth to hide a smile, while Jake discreetly positioned his phone to capture whatever was about to happen. Emma took a deep breath and explained the concept again, raising her voice slightly but maintaining her characteristic calm delivery. "Thanks, that's much better," Tyler said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "It's just that some of us need things explained clearly, you know?" The comment hung in the air like a challenge, but Emma simply nodded and moved on to help other students. She had dealt with difficult students before, and she knew that Tyler was testing her boundaries to see how she would react. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What Tyler didn't understand was that Emma's quiet demeanor wasn't a sign of weakness or uncertainty. It was a conscious choice, developed through years of learning to control impulses that could have devastating consequences if unleashed. Truth about Emma Rodriguez was hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. Before becoming a teacher, she had lived a completely different life in Las Vegas, Nevada, where she was known by an entirely different name in entirely different circles. Silent Storm, Rodriguez had been a rising star in the world of mixed martial arts with a professional record of 15 wins and only 3 losses. Her specialty was ground fighting, using a combination of Brazilian jiu-jitsu and wrestling techniques that allowed her to submit opponents who were often significantly larger and stronger. Emma's fighting career had ended abruptly 3 years earlier when a devastating knee injury during a championship bout required multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. The physical damage was repairable, but the concussion she suffered in the same fight raised concerns about long-term brain health that ultimately convinced her to retire from professional competition. The transition from fighter to teacher had been jarring, requiring her to suppress instincts that had been finely honed over years of training and competition. Her former coach, Roberto "Rob" Santos, had been the one to suggest teaching as a new career path. "You've always been good at helping younger fighters understand technique," he had told her during one of their conversations about her future. "Maybe you can use those same skills to help kids understand other things." The suggestion had seemed impossible at first, but Emma discovered that she possessed a natural gift for connecting with students who felt overlooked or undervalued. The irony of her current situation wasn't lost on Emma. She spent her days surrounded by teenagers who saw her as a pushover, completely unaware that she could probably defeat most of their fathers in hand-to-hand combat. Her calloused knuckles were hidden beneath hand cream and carefully applied concealer, while the subtle scars on her arms and legs remained covered by conservative clothing choices. Even her posture was deliberately altered, the confident stance of a trained fighter, replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. Emma's philosophy about violence had been shaped by years of training under Rob's guidance. Fighting is a tool, he had always taught his students. Like any tool, it can be used to build or destroy. The mark of a true martial artist is knowing when not to use what you've learned. This wisdom had become Emma's guiding principle, both in the cage and in her new life as an educator. She understood that her training gave her options that others didn't have, which made the choice not to use violence even more meaningful. As the school day progressed, Emma found herself thinking about the delicate balance she maintained every day. Her students saw her as weak and timid. Her colleagues viewed her as nice but unremarkable, and her administrators appreciated her because she never caused problems or demanded attention. This carefully constructed persona allowed her to do the Kangwam work she loved, helping students discover the power of literature and critical thinking without the complications that would arise if anyone knew about her past. The lunch period brought a brief respite from classroom management, and Emma retreated to her usual spot in the teacher's lounge. While other faculty members gathered around tables to share stories and complaints about their day, Emma sat alone in a corner chair, grading papers and eating a simple sandwich she had brought from home. This solitude wasn't born from antisocial tendencies, but from a recognition that her colleagues would ask questions she wasn't prepared to answer if she became too friendly or open about her background. Through the lounge windows, Emma could see students gathered in the courtyard, their social groupings as clearly defined as territories on a map. Tyler and his friends occupied the prime real estate near the central fountain, their animated conversations punctuated by loud laughter that carried across the space. Other students gave them a wide berth, either out of respect for their social status or fear of becoming targets for their entertainment. Emma noticed David Park sitting alone at a picnic table near the edge of the courtyard, reading a book while eating his lunch. The sight reminded her of her own high school experience, though her circumstances had been far different. She had grown up in foster care, moving between homes and schools with regularity that made forming lasting relationships difficult. Literature had been her escape and companion during those turbulent years, providing consistency and comfort when everything else in her life felt uncertain. The afternoon brought Emma's most challenging class, a mixed-level English course that included both college-bound students and those who were simply fulfilling graduation requirements. Tyler, Madison, and Jake were all enrolled in this class, along with David and about 20 other students whose academic abilities and motivation levels varied dramatically. Managing this diverse group required all of Emma's teaching skills, as she worked to keep advanced students engaged while ensuring that struggling learners weren't left behind. Today's lesson focused on identifying themes in short stories, using examples that Emma hoped would resonate with students from different backgrounds and interests. She had chosen stories that dealt with themes of identity, belonging, and personal growth, topics that she believed were universal enough to connect with every student in the room, regardless of their academic level or social status. Tyler's Disruptive behavior escalated during this class, perhaps emboldened by the presence of his friends and the larger audience. He made increasingly obvious attempts to undermine Emma's authority, from stage-whispered comments about her appearance to exaggerated size whenever she asked him to participate in discussions. Madison and Jake encouraged his behavior with their laughter and knowing looks, creating a dynamic that Emma recognized as dangerous to the classroom environment. The situation reached a turning point when Emma asked students to work in small groups to discuss the themes they had identified in the assigned reading. Tyler loudly announced that he hadn't done the reading and didn't see the point in discussing boring stories that have nothing to do with real life. When Emma gently suggested that he could still contribute to the discussion by listening to his group members and asking thoughtful questions, Tyler responded with a comment that made several students gasp audibly. "Maybe if you could make this stuff interesting instead of putting us all to sleep, people would actually want to learn it," Tyler said, his voice carrying clearly across the classroom. "I mean, no offense, but you're probably the most boring teacher in this school." The comment stung more than Emma cared to admit, partly because it echoed her own insecurities about her teaching abilities. She had chosen to adopt a quiet, thoughtful approach to education specifically because it felt authentic to who she was trying to become. The suggestion that this approach was inadequate or boring challenged not just her professional competence, but her entire identity transformation. Emma felt her jaw clench involuntarily, her body's muscle memory responding to the challenge in Tyler's voice. For just a moment, she could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once preceded every fight, the heightened awareness and controlled aggression that had made her successful in the cage. Her hands, which had been resting casually at her sides, automatically shifted into positions that would allow for quick defensive movements if necessary. The moment passed quickly, visible only to someone who knew what to look for, but it left Emma shaken by how easily her old instincts had surfaced. She took a deep breath and responded to Tyler's comment with the same measured tone she had maintained throughout the day, acknowledging his feedback and redirecting the class's attention back to the lesson. But inside, she felt the first cracks forming in the careful control she had spent 3 years building. After class, David Park lingered as other students filed out of the room. Emma could see that he wanted to say something but was struggling to find the words. She waited patiently while he gathered his courage, recognizing in his hesitation the same uncertainty she had felt countless times during her own adolescence. "Miss Rodriguez," David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted to say that I think your class is really interesting." Tyler doesn't speak for all of us. The simple statement of support meant more to Emma than David could possibly know. In a day filled with subtle challenges to her authority and competence, his words reminded her why she had chosen teaching in the first place. She thanked him sincerely, and they spent a few minutes discussing the themes from the day's lesson, a conversation that reinforced Emma's belief in the power of literature to connect people across different experiences and backgrounds. As David left the classroom, Emma began organizing her materials for the next day, trying to process the complex emotions that Tyler's behavior had triggered. She understood that his disrespect was likely more about his own insecurities and need for social validation than any genuine criticism of her teaching methods. But understanding the psychology behind his behavior didn't make it any less challenging to deal with on a daily basis. Emma's evening routine provided a stark contrast to her daytime persona. After arriving at her small apartment complex on the outskirts of Riverside, she changed from her conservative teacher clothes into athletic wear and drove to a private gym, where she maintained her training regimen. The facility was nothing like the high-end MMA gyms where she had once trained, but it had everything she needed to stay in fighting shape: heavy bags, mats for groundwork, and weights for strength training. Her workouts served multiple purposes. Beyond physical fitness, The rhythm of striking heavy bags helped her process the stress and frustration of difficult days, while grappling practice maintained the muscle memory and reflexes that had once been essential to her survival. More importantly, these training sessions reminded her of who she had been and who she still was beneath the carefully constructed facade of Emma Rodriguez, mild-mannered English teacher. As she worked through combinations on the heavy bag, Emma allowed herself to imagine different responses to Tyler's classroom behavior. In her mind, she could see exactly how she would handle a physical confrontation, the precise timing needed to close distance, the specific techniques that would be most effective given their size difference, the submission holds that would end any conflict quickly and decisively. These mental exercises weren't fantasies of violence, but rather a form of tactical analysis that helped her understand her options in any given situation. The knowledge that she possessed these capabilities was both comforting and burdensome. On one hand, Emma never had to fear for her physical safety in the way that many people did. She could walk alone at night, handle aggressive strangers, and defend herself or others if circumstances required it. On the other hand, this knowledge made every interpersonal conflict more complex, as she had to constantly weigh the consequences of actions that others couldn't even imagine taking. Rob Santos had once told her that the hardest part of learning to fight wasn't mastering techniques or building physical strength, but rather learning to live with the responsibility that came with those abilities. Once you know you can hurt someone, he had said, every argument becomes a choice about what kind of person you want to be. Emma thought about those words often, especially on days when students like Tyler tested her patience and self-control. The next morning brought new challenges as Emma discovered that Tyler's behavior from the previous day had been just the beginning of a more elaborate plan. Jake had apparently been filming various interactions throughout the week, collecting footage for what he described to classmates as an epic teacher roast video that would make them all TikTok famous. The project had the enthusiastic support of Tyler and Madison, who saw it as an opportunity to gain social media followers while humiliating someone they viewed as an easy target. Emma became aware of the scheme gradually, noticing Jake's phone pointed in her direction more frequently and catching fragments of whispered conversations about getting good footage and making this go viral. The realization that she was being systematically targeted for public humiliation brought back memories of her fighting days, when opponents and their teams would sometimes attempt psychological warfare to gain advantages before matches. The difference was that in professional fighting, these tactics were expected and regulated. Both fighters knew they were engaged in combat, with rules and referees to ensure fair play. What Tyler, Madison, and Jake were planning was different. A one-sided attack on someone they believed couldn't or wouldn't fight back. They had identified what they saw as weakness and were preparing to exploit it for entertainment and social media gain. Emma's training had taught her to recognize predatory behavior in all its forms, and she could see the pattern clearly now. Tyler was the alpha, using his social status and physical presence to establish dominance. Madison served as his lieutenant, providing emotional support and creative input for their campaigns of harassment. Jake functioned as the documentarian, capturing their exploits for posterity and public consumption. Together, they formed a hunting pack that had apparently decided Emma would be their next victim. Understanding their strategy gave Emma several options for response. She could report their behavior to administrators, though her experience suggested that popular athletes often received minimal consequences for actions that would result in severe punishment for other students. She could alter her teaching style to make herself a less appealing target, though this would mean abandoning the authentic approach that made her effective with students who genuinely wanted to learn. Or she could continue as she had been, maintaining her principles while preparing for whatever they had planned. Emma chose the third option, partly out of professional pride and partly out of curiosity about how far they would be willing to take their harassment. Her fighting background had taught her to study opponents carefully, learning their patterns and weaknesses before engaging. Tyler, Madison, and Jake were revealing their characters through their behavior, providing Emma with valuable information about their motivations and likely tactics. The week progressed with escalating incidents of disrespect and attempted humiliation. Tyler began asking increasingly inappropriate questions during class discussions, phrasing them in ways that seemed innocent to casual observers, but were clearly designed to make Emma uncomfortable. Madison contributed by making subtle comments about Emma's appearance and teaching style, delivered with the kind of sweet smile that made direct confrontation difficult. Jake continued his documentation efforts, capturing Emma's responses to their provocations with the dedication of a filmmaker working on an important project. Through it all, Emma maintained her composure with the discipline of someone trained to perform under pressure. She had fought in front of crowds of thousands, with significant money and career advancement on the line, so the amateur psychological tactics of high school students felt manageable by comparison. What concerned her more was the effect their behavior was having on other students, particularly David Park and others who looked to her for protection from the same kind of bullying they were witnessing. Emma realized that her response to Tyler's group would send a message to every student in her classes about what kind of behavior was acceptable and what consequences could be expected for crossing certain lines. If she allowed herself to be victimized without response, she would be teaching her students that power belonged to those willing to use it cruelly. If she responded too harshly, she would be demonstrating that violence was an acceptable solution to interpersonal conflicts. The challenge was finding a response that would protect her dignity and authority while maintaining the principles that had guided her transformation from fighter to educator. Emma knew that this situation would likely define her tenure at Lincoln High School and possibly her entire teaching career. Whatever happened next would become part of her story, either as a moment of weakness that haunted her or as a demonstration of strength that inspired others. As Friday afternoon approached, Emma could sense that Tyler's group was preparing for some kind of climactic event. Their whispered conversations had become more frequent and excited, while Jake's filming had taken on an urgency that suggested a deadline was approaching. Emma suspected that they were planning something for the weekend, possibly hoping to launch their viral video when it would have maximum impact on social media platforms. The anticipation was almost familiar to Emma, reminiscent of the days before important fights, when nervous energy would build until it could only be released through physical action. The difference was that in her fighting career, she had always known when and where the confrontation would occur. Now she was waiting for opponents to make their move, a reactive position that went against every instinct her training had developed. Emma spent Friday evening in her apartment, alternating between grading papers and working out, trying to maintain the balance between her two identities while preparing for whatever Monday would bring. She had no way of knowing that Tyler, Madison, and Jake were spending their weekend editing footage and planning what they believed would be the ultimate humiliation of Lincoln High School's quietest teacher. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would reveal truths about all of them that they never expected to face. Monday morning arrived with the crisp October air that signaled the full arrival of autumn in Riverside. Emma Rodriguez pulled into the Lincoln High School parking lot at 7:15, 30 minutes before her first class, as was her routine. She preferred these quiet moments before the building filled with students and faculty, using the time to center herself and prepare for whatever challenges the day might bring. As she gathered her lesson plans and coffee mug from the passenger seat, Emma noticed Tyler Brooks' lifted pickup truck parked prominently near the main entrance, its custom sound system already thumping bass lines that vibrated through nearby vehicles. The sight of Tyler's truck served as an unwelcome reminder that her weekend respite was over. Emma had spent Saturday and Sunday in relative peace, grading essays about personal growth and resilience that her students had written, finding inspiration in their honest reflections about overcoming obstacles. Some of these essays had revealed struggles with family problems, financial hardship, and social isolation that made Emma's own challenges seem manageable by comparison. David Park had written particularly movingly about feeling invisible in social situations, describing the loneliness of being academically gifted, but socially awkward in an environment that valued athletic achievement and social media popularity above intellectual curiosity. Emma's weekend had also included her usual training sessions at the private gym, where she had worked through combinations with unusual intensity, her body seeming to anticipate the need for physical preparation. Her former coach Rob Santos had taught her to trust these instincts, explaining that experienced fighters often sensed approaching conflicts before their conscious minds recognized the signs. The heavy bag bore the evidence of her weekend sessions, several new scuff marks from strikes thrown with precision and power that would have surprised anyone who knew her only as the soft-spoken English teacher. As Emma walked through the nearly empty hallways toward her classroom, she passed trophy cases filled with photographs and awards celebrating Lincoln High's athletic achievements. Tyler's image appeared in several of these displays, his confident smile beaming from team photos and individual recognition ceremonies. The contrast between his celebrated status and her anonymity struck Emma as emblematic of the power imbalance they were navigating. Tyler commanded respect through physical dominance and social connections, while Emma had chosen to hide the very qualities that might have earned her similar recognition. The first period proceeded without incident, filled with students who seemed genuinely interested in the day's lesson about character, motivation, and conflict resolution in literature. Emma found herself drawing parallels between fictional characters who faced impossible choices and real people who had to decide how to respond when their values were challenged. The discussion grew animated as students debated whether characters should compromise their principles to avoid conflict or stand firm regardless of consequences, though none of them realized how personally relevant these questions were to their teacher's current situation. During the break between first and second periods, Emma overheard fragments of conversation that confirmed her suspicions about Tyler's group planning something significant. Madison Wells was discussing the perfect setup with Jessica Chun, another cheerleader, while Jake Martinez showed footage on his phone to several football players who responded with laughter and encouragement. The energy surrounding these conversations felt different from their usual casual cruelty, carrying the excitement of people anticipating a major event. Emma's second period class included several students who had been present during previous incidents with Tyler's group, and she noticed their heightened attention as they settled into their seats. These students had become accustomed to witnessing subtle forms of harassment during Emma's classes, but their body language suggested they sensed something bigger was approaching. David Park in particular seemed nervous, glancing frequently toward the door as if expecting trouble to walk through it at any moment. The lesson focused on analyzing how authors use symbolism to convey deeper meanings, using examples from short stories that dealt with themes of hidden identity and revealed truth. Emma chose these selections deliberately, finding some dark humor in discussing literary characters who concealed important aspects of themselves while she did exactly the same thing in her daily life. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was teaching students to look for hidden meanings and deeper truths while carefully concealing her own most significant experiences. Halfway through the period, Tyler Brooks entered the classroom with his usual swagger, but Emma immediately noticed differences in his demeanor that set her nerves on edge. His smile seemed more predatory than usual, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the advantages in an upcoming confrontation. Madison followed closely behind him, her expression barely containing excitement, while Jake brought up the rear with his phone already positioned to capture whatever was about to unfold. Tyler's disruption began subtly, with exaggerated confusion about the symbolism assignment and loud whispers to his companions about not understanding all this deep thinking stuff. Emma continued her lesson with determined calm, but she could feel the atmosphere in the classroom shifting as other students sensed the building tension. David Park had stopped taking notes entirely, his attention focused on Tyler's table with obvious anxiety. The situation escalated when Emma assigned students to work in pairs to identify symbolic elements in their chosen stories. Tyler immediately announced that he needed help understanding his assignment, raising his hand with theatrical urgency. When Emma approached his desk, she could see Jake positioning his phone to capture their interaction from multiple angles, while Madison watched with barely contained anticipation. "Miss Rodriguez," Tyler said, his voice carrying across the quiet classroom, "I'm having trouble with this symbolism thing. Like, how am I supposed to know what the author was really thinking? Maybe they just wrote a story about what it seems to be about." The question itself was reasonable, the kind of inquiry that Emma encountered regularly from students who struggled with literary analysis. But Tyler's tone and timing, combined with his friend's obvious preparation to document her response, made it clear that this was a setup rather than a genuine request for help. Emma recognized the trap being laid, but chose to respond as she would to any student question, explaining the concept of symbolism with patience and clarity. Authors often use objects, characters, or situations to represent larger ideas, Emma said, maintaining her characteristic soft tone despite the obvious performance aspect of the interaction. "The key is to look for patterns and repetitions that might suggest deeper meaning beyond the surface story." Tyler nodded with exaggerated seriousness, then asked, "But what if the author is just trying to confuse people? Like, what if they're hiding something because they're afraid to say what they really mean?" The question hit uncomfortably close to Emma's own situation, and she felt her jaw tighten involuntarily. Tyler's knowing smile suggested that the parallel wasn't accidental, though Emma doubted he understood exactly how accurate his observation was. She responded with professional composure, explaining that authors might use symbolism to explore sensitive topics or universal themes that require careful handling. "That's interesting," Tyler said, his voice growing louder and more performative. "So you're saying that people hide their true selves because they're scared of what others might think? That seems kind of weak to me." The comment drew murmurs from other students, who recognized the personal nature of Tyler's observation, even if they didn't understand its full implications. Emma felt her training reflexes activating as her body interpreted Tyler's escalating aggression as a potential threat. Her stance shifted almost imperceptibly, weight moving to the balls of her feet in preparation for movement, while her hands relaxed into positions that would allow for quick defensive reactions. Emma's response was measured and professional, acknowledging Tyler's perspective while redirecting the conversation back to literary analysis. But internally, she was conducting the kind of tactical assessment that had kept her alive in dozens of cage fights. Tyler was testing boundaries and building towards something, using his social status and physical presence to create pressure while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. Madison and Jake were providing support and documentation, turning the classroom into a kind of arena where Emma was expected to perform the role of victim. The parallels to her fighting career were unmistakable, though the stakes and rules were completely different. In professional MMA, both opponents entered the cage knowing they were there to fight, with referees and medical personnel standing by to ensure safety. Tyler's approach was more like the kind of predatory behavior Emma had encountered in less regulated environments, where stronger individuals use psychological pressure and social dynamics to dominate perceived weaker targets. As the class period continued, Tyler's behavior became increasingly bold and disruptive. He made comments about Emma's appearance that skirted the line between observation and harassment, questioned her teaching credentials with mock concern for his education, and encouraged other students to join his performance through eye contact and gestures. Jake documented everything with the dedication of a filmmaker capturing a historic event. while Madison provided encouragement through smiles and quiet laughter. Emma recognized that she was facing a coordinated campaign designed to provoke a reaction that could be captured and shared for entertainment. Tyler's group had identified her as someone who would absorb abuse without fighting back, making her perfect content for their social media ambitions. What they didn't understand was that Emma's apparent passivity wasn't weakness, but rather the kind of disciplined control that separated professional fighters from street brawlers. The bell-ending second period brought temporary relief, but Emma knew that Tyler's group was just getting started. Their behavior had the feel of a preliminary round, testing her responses and gathering material for whatever they had planned as their main event. Emma watched them leave the classroom with the satisfaction of people who believed their strategy was working perfectly, unaware that they were revealing their tactical approach to someone trained to analyze and counter aggressive behavior. During her free period, Emma retreated to her empty classroom and locked the door, needing space to process what she had experienced and prepare for what was likely coming next. She stood at the window overlooking the student parking lot, watching Tyler and his friends gather around his truck with animated conversations that suggested continued planning. Their body language radiated confidence and excitement, the demeanor of predators who believed they had found perfect prey. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and opening it revealed a short video clip that made her stomach clench with anger. The footage showed her interaction with Tyler from earlier that morning, edited to make her responses seem confused and inadequate. The video was captioned with laughing emojis and text that read, "When your teacher doesn't even understand her own subject." The clip had already been shared dozens of times across various social media platforms, generating comments that ranged from mockery to genuine concern for Emma's competence as an educator. The violation felt more personal than physical assault would have been. Emma had endured countless punches, kicks, and submission attempts during her fighting career, but those attacks had been part of a sport with rules and mutual respect between competitors. Tyler's group was attacking her character and professional reputation, using technology to amplify their cruelty and ensure maximum humiliation. The video would potentially be seen by students, parents, administrators, and anyone else with access to social media, creating consequences that could extend far beyond the school environment. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she set her phone aside, not from fear but from the effort required to suppress her natural response to this level of provocation. Every instinct developed through years of combat training was screaming at her to end this situation immediately and decisively. She knew exactly how she could accomplish that goal, understanding precisely which pressure points and joint manipulations would convince Tyler and his friends to delete their videos and leave her alone permanently. But Emma also understood the broader implications of any violent response. Using her fighting skills against students would end her teaching career instantly and likely result in criminal charges, regardless of the provocation she had endured. More importantly, it would represent a fundamental betrayal of the principles that had guided her transformation from professional fighter to educator. She had chosen teaching specifically because it allowed her to use different kinds of strength to help people grow and learn. The internal conflict Emma faced was more challenging than any physical opponent she had encountered in the cage. Her old self, the woman who had earned the nickname Silent Storm through her devastating combination of patience and explosive action, wanted to handle the situation with the directness that had made her successful in professional fighting. Her new self, the teacher who had found purpose in helping students discover their own potential, insisted on finding a solution that didn't involve violence or revenge. Rob Santos had prepared her for moments like this during their training sessions, though neither of them had anticipated the specific circumstances she now faced. The hardest fights aren't against other people, he had told her during one of their philosophical discussions about martial arts. They're against the parts of yourself that want to solve problems the easy way. Anyone can throw a punch, but it takes real strength to choose not to when you know you could win. Emma spent her lunch period walking the empty hallways of Lincoln High, using the physical movement to work through her emotional turmoil while maintaining her calm exterior. She passed classroom after classroom where dedicated teachers worked with students who genuinely wanted to learn, reminding herself of why she had chosen this profession and what she stood to lose if she allowed Tyler's group to provoke her into abandoning her principles. The afternoon brought Emma's most challenging class, the mixed-level course that included Tyler, Madison, Jake, and David, along with 20 other students whose academic abilities and social awareness varied dramatically. Emma entered the classroom with renewed determination to maintain her professional standards regardless of whatever Tyler's group had planned, but she could feel the anticipation radiating from several students who had apparently seen the morning's video and were expecting more entertainment. Tyler arrived early for once, claiming a seat in the front row with Madison and Jake flanking him like bodyguards. Their positioning was clearly strategic, designed to put them in optimal position for whatever performance they had planned, while ensuring that Jake could capture Emma's reactions from the most unflattering angles possible. Other students seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen, with conversations dying down as everyone settled into their seats with unusual attention. Emma began her lesson on conflict resolution in literature, choosing examples that dealt with characters who faced impossible choices between competing values. The selection was intentional, reflecting her own current situation, while providing a framework for discussing how people navigate complex moral dilemmas. She hoped that examining these themes through literature might provide insights that could help her find a path forward that honored both her fighting background and her teaching commitment. The lesson proceeded normally for the first 15 minutes, with students engaging thoughtfully with the material and contributing meaningful observations about character motivation and moral complexity. Emma began to hope that Tyler's group might have exhausted their enthusiasm for disruption during the morning classes, but that optimism proved premature when Tyler raised his hand with a question that immediately shifted the classroom's energy. "Miss Rodriguez," Tyler said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "I'm curious about something. You keep talking about these characters who have hidden strengths or secret backgrounds. Do you think people in real life do that too? Like, do you think someone could be pretending to be weak when they're actually strong?" The question was delivered with perfect innocence, but Emma could see the trap being laid. Tyler's knowing smile and Jake's readiness with his phone made it clear that this was the beginning of whatever they had planned as their climactic performance. Emma felt her pulse quicken, not from anxiety but from the familiar pre-fight awareness that had always preceded her most challenging matches. Emma answered Tyler's question with the same measured professionalism she had maintained throughout their previous interactions, discussing how literature often explored themes of hidden identity and the reasons people might conceal their true capabilities. Her response was thoughtful and educational, providing no ammunition for mockery or humiliation. But Tyler wasn't finished with his performance. "That's really interesting," Tyler said, standing up from his desk with theatrical casualness, "because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Like, what would happen if someone who seemed really weak and helpless turned out to be something completely different? Wouldn't that be crazy?" The classroom had fallen completely silent, with every student focused on the interaction between Tyler and Emma. David Park looked genuinely frightened, his understanding of literature apparently extending to recognizing foreshadowing when he saw it in real life. Madison was practically vibrating with excitement, while Jake had positioned his phone to capture both Tyler and Emma in the same frame. Emma maintained her calm exterior while conducting a rapid tactical assessment of her situation. Tyler was clearly building towards some kind of revelation or confrontation, using his physical presence and social status to create pressure while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. His positioning near her desk was strategically chosen to invade her personal space while blocking her most direct route to the classroom door. "People often have hidden depths," Emma replied evenly, her training allowing her to project calm confidence even as every combat instinct screamed warnings about Tyler's escalating aggression. Literature helps us explore the complex reasons why someone might choose not to reveal everything about themselves. Tyler's smile widened at her response, and Emma recognized the expression from her fighting days. It was the look of an opponent who believed he had identified a weakness and was preparing to exploit it decisively. In the cage, that moment had always preceded either victory or devastating counterattack, depending on whether the perceived weakness was real or deliberately displayed. "You know what I think?" Tyler said, moving closer to Emma's desk with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the advantages. "I think some people hide behind being weak because they're afraid of what might happen if they tried to be strong. I think they use it as an excuse to avoid taking risks or standing up for themselves." The personal nature of Tyler's attack was unmistakable now, and Emma could see several students shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they recognized the cruelty behind his words. David Park looked like he wanted to intervene but lacked the social confidence to challenge Tyler directly. Madison and Jake were clearly enjoying the show, their excitement building as Tyler escalated his psychological assault. Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar sensation from her fighting career that always preceded moments of decisive action. Her body was preparing for conflict whether her mind had made that choice or not, muscle memory and trained reflexes activating in response to what her subconscious recognized as a clear threat. The careful control she had maintained for months was beginning to crack under the sustained pressure of Tyler's campaign. "Everyone has their own way of navigating challenges," Emma said, her voice remaining steady despite the internal storm building within her. "Some people prefer direct confrontation, while others choose more subtle approaches. Both can be effective depending on the situation." Tyler laughed, a sound that carried no warmth or genuine amusement, designed purely to demonstrate his perceived dominance over Emma and the classroom environment. "Subtle approaches," he repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call hiding in the corner and hoping nobody notices you? Because that's what it looks like to me." The comment hit Emma like a physical blow, not because it was accurate, but because it represented such a fundamental misunderstanding of the choice she had made to embrace peaceful solutions to conflict. Tyler saw her restraint as weakness, her professionalism as fear, and her commitment to education as evidence of inadequacy. He had no understanding of the discipline required to choose nonviolence, when violence would be easier and more immediately effective. Emma's response was interrupted by the sound of Jake's phone notification, indicating that he was live streaming their interaction to social media platforms where viewers could comment in real time. The realization that this harassment was being broadcast to potentially hundreds of people added a new dimension to Emma's humiliation, while simultaneously providing evidence of Tyler's systematic campaign against her. "Oh look," Madison said with false excitement, reading comments from Jake's livestream. "People are really enjoying this. Someone just asked if Miss Rodriguez is going to cry. Another person wants to know if she's ever stood up for herself about anything." The cruelty of involving anonymous internet strangers in her humiliation struck Emma as particularly cowardly, transforming what should have been a private disciplinary matter into public entertainment. Tyler's group had weaponized social media to amplify their bullying while protecting themselves through the distance and anonymity that technology provided. Emma stood quietly at her desk, outwardly calm, but internally conducting the kind of strategic analysis that had made her successful in professional fighting. She was assessing Tyler's positioning, Madison's role as psychological warfare specialist, Jake's function as documentarian, and the classroom environment that would constrain her options regardless of what choices she made. Her training had taught her to gather information before acting, understanding that patience often created opportunities that immediate reaction would miss. "You know what I think would be really interesting?" Tyler said, his voice taking on the kind of false enthusiasm that Emma recognized as a prelude to escalation. "I think it would be fascinating to see what happens when someone who's always passive finally gets pushed too far. Like, is there a point where even the weakest person has to do something?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Emma realized that Tyler was actively trying to provoke her into some kind of reaction that would justify whatever he had planned next. His behavior had the calculated feel of someone following a script designed to create maximum humiliation while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. Emma's phone buzzed again with notifications from the spreading video, each alert representing another person who was now viewing her as entertainment rather than as a professional educator trying to do her job. The violation felt deeper than physical assault, attacking not just her dignity, but her ability to serve the students who depended on her for guidance and support. The afternoon sun streaming through the classroom windows cast long shadows across the floor, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere for what Emma was beginning to understand would be the defining moment of her teaching career. Tyler stood confidently near her desk. Madison watched with predatory anticipation. Jake documented everything for posterity and social media fame, while 20 other students waited to see how their quiet English teacher would respond to systematic humiliation. Emma felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that had always preceded her most important fights, her perception sharpening as adrenaline prepared her body for whatever was about to happen. Every detail of the classroom became hyper-real. The nervous shifting of students in their seats, the barely contained excitement radiating from Tyler's group, the weight of her own breathing as she maintained outward calm while preparing internally for a confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. The choice before Emma was stark and irreversible. She could continue absorbing Tyler's abuse, maintaining her professional composure, while allowing her dignity and authority to be systematically destroyed for social media entertainment. Or she could respond in ways that would reveal aspects of herself that she had spent 3 years trying to leave behind, potentially ending her teaching career, but reclaiming her right to be treated with basic human respect. Emma Rodriguez, former professional fighter known as Silent Storm, stood at the crossroads between her past and future, knowing that the next few moments would determine not just how this particular confrontation ended, but who she would be for the rest of her life. The tension in room 204 had reached a breaking point when David Park suddenly stood up from his desk, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor with a sound that cut through the suffocating atmosphere like a blade. Every head in the classroom turned toward the junior who had spent the entire semester trying to blend into the background, his face flushed with a combination of fear and determination that surprised even Emma. David's hands were shaking slightly, but his voice carried clearly across the silent room as he addressed Tyler's ongoing performance. "That's enough," David said, his words barely above a whisper, but somehow commanding attention from every person in the classroom. "Miss Rodriguez doesn't deserve this. She's a good teacher who actually cares about helping us learn, and you're treating her like garbage for your stupid social media games." The intervention was so unexpected that Tyler actually took a step backward, his confident demeanor faltering for the first time since he had begun his calculated campaign of harassment. Madison's mouth fell open in genuine shock while Jake's phone wavered as he tried to decide whether to focus on David's unexpected rebellion or Tyler's reaction to being challenged by someone he had always considered beneath his notice. Emma felt a surge of protective instinct that nearly overwhelmed her careful self-control. David's courage in standing up to Tyler despite the obvious social consequences reminded her of why she had chosen teaching in the first place. This quiet, thoughtful student who reminded her of her own adolescent self was risking his own safety to defend her dignity, demonstrating the kind of moral courage that she had been trying to model through her restrained responses to Tyler's provocations. Tyler's recovery was swift and vicious, his attention shifting from Emma to David, with the predatory focus of someone who had identified a more vulnerable target. "Oh, look," Tyler said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. The little bookworm finally found his voice. "What's the matter, David? You got a crush on Miss Rodriguez? Is that why you're trying to be her white knight?" The personal attack on David struck Emma more powerfully than any of Tyler's previous comments about her own appearance or teaching abilities. She could see the humiliation flooding David's face as Tyler's insinuation hit its mark, designed to shame him not just for speaking up, but for the underlying kindness that had motivated his intervention. Madison giggled at Tyler's comeback, while several other students looked away in obvious discomfort with the escalating cruelty. "I'm just saying she doesn't deserve to be treated this way," David replied, his voice growing stronger despite the blush spreading across his cheeks. "You're being mean for no reason, except to make yourself look cool for your followers. That's not cool, it's just pathetic." The word pathetic seemed to hit Tyler like a physical blow, and Emma watched his expression shift from amused condescension to genuine anger. In her fighting career, she had learned to recognize the moment when an opponent's control began to slip, revealing the raw emotion beneath their tactical facade. Tyler was experiencing that moment now, his carefully constructed image of effortless superiority challenged by a student he had never considered capable of resistance. "Pathetic?" Tyler repeated, his voice rising with genuine indignation. "You want to see pathetic? Look around this room, David. Look at yourself, sitting alone every day reading your little books because nobody wants to talk to you. Look at your teacher, who's so weak she can't even stand up for herself when someone calls her out. That's pathetic." Emma could feel the entire classroom holding its breath as Tyler's mask of casual cruelty finally slipped completely. His attack on David revealed the genuine malice that had been driving his behavior all along, the calculated nature of his harassment becoming clear to everyone present. Jake continued filming with obvious excitement, recognizing that this confrontation would generate far more social media engagement than their original plan to simply humiliate Emma. David's response surprised everyone, including Emma. Instead of backing down or apologizing as Tyler clearly expected, the quiet junior took a step closer to Tyler's position near Emma's desk. "You know what I think is pathetic?" David said, his voice steady despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "I think it's pathetic when someone has to pick on people who can't fight back just to feel good about themselves. I think it's pathetic when someone needs to film it and post it online because they're so desperate for attention." The direct challenge to Tyler's character and motivations created a shift in the classroom's energy that Emma recognized from her fighting experience. The moment when trash talk and psychological warfare gave way to genuine conflict, when pride and reputation became more important than strategic thinking. Tyler's face had flushed red, his hands clenching into fists, as he struggled to process being called out by someone he had always considered insignificant. Emma realized that David's intervention, while admirable in its courage, had escalated the situation beyond anything she could resolve through continued passive resistance. Tyler's attention was now focused on punishing David for his defiance, while Madison and Jake were clearly excited by the prospect of capturing real physical confrontation on camera. The situation was spiraling toward violence, and Emma understood that her choices had narrowed to either allowing David to be victimized for defending her or finally revealing the capability she had spent so long concealing. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Tyler said, moving closer to David with the kind of aggressive body language that Emma recognized as a prelude to physical assault. "You think because you read books and get good grades that makes you better than everyone else? Let me tell you something, David. In the real world, nobody cares how smart you are if you can't back it up." Emma watched Tyler advance on David with the trained eye of someone who had spent years studying aggressive behavior and recognizing the signs of impending violence. Tyler's posture, the positioning of his feet, the way his hands moved as he spoke all indicated someone preparing to throw a punch. David, despite his courage in speaking up, clearly had no experience with physical confrontation and was backing away with obvious fear. The moment crystallized for Emma with the kind of clarity she had experienced in the cage, when split-second decisions meant the difference between victory and defeat. David had put himself at risk to defend her honor and professional dignity. Tyler was preparing to assault a student half his size for the entertainment of social media followers. The situation had moved beyond harassment into territory that demanded immediate intervention, regardless of the consequences to her carefully constructed new identity. Emma's training had taught her that there were moments when violence became not just acceptable but necessary, when the failure to act would result in greater harm than action itself. She had reached that threshold now, watching Tyler prepare to attack a student who had shown the moral courage to stand up for what was right. Every principle that had guided her transformation from fighter to teacher now pointed toward the same conclusion. Some things were worth fighting for, and protecting students from harm was at the top of that list. "Tyler," Emma said, her voice cutting through the tension with authority that made everyone in the classroom turn toward her. The change in her tone was subtle but unmistakable, carrying undertones of command that had never been present in her previous interactions with students. "Step away from David, now." The transformation in Emma's demeanor was immediate and startling. The hunched shoulders and downcast eyes that had characterized her interactions with Tyler's group were gone, replaced by the confident posture of someone who was comfortable with confrontation. Her voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made Tyler pause in his advance toward David, uncertain about this new version of the teacher he had been tormenting for weeks. "Oh, now she wants to get involved," Madison said with nervous laughter, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics but not understanding its significance. "Too bad it's too late, Miss Rodriguez. Tyler's just having a conversation with David about respect." Emma ignored Madison completely, her attention focused entirely on Tyler as she evaluated his positioning and likely responses to various interventions. Her years of cage fighting had taught her to assess opponents quickly and accurately, identifying their strengths, weaknesses, and probable tactical approaches within moments of engaging. Tyler was bigger and stronger than David, but Emma could see from his stance and movement patterns that his physical capabilities were based entirely on size and athletic training rather than any real combat experience. "The conversation is over," Emma said, moving from behind her desk with fluid grace that suggested confidence in her ability to control the situation. "Tyler, return to your seat. David, thank you for your support, but I can handle this myself." Tyler's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "Handle what exactly? You think you're going to do something to me? You can barely handle teaching the class without stuttering through your lessons. What are you going to do? Give me detention?" The mockery in Tyler's voice carried clearly across the classroom, but Emma noticed that he hadn't moved any closer to David since she had intervened. Some instinctive part of his consciousness was apparently recognizing changes in her behavior that his rational mind hadn't processed yet. Emma had learned during her fighting career that predators often sensed danger before they could articulate why, their subconscious awareness picking up on subtle cues that indicated a shift in power dynamics. "What I'm going to do," Emma said, her voice remaining calm but carrying undertones of steel that made several students sit up straighter in their seats, "is ask you one more time to return to your seat and stop threatening my students. After that, I'll handle the situation as I see fit." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and Emma could see Tyler struggling to process this new version of the teacher he had been systematically humiliating. Jake continued filming with obvious excitement, recognizing that whatever was about to happen would generate far more social media engagement than their original harassment campaign. Madison looked genuinely confused by Emma's transformation, unsure how to respond to someone who was no longer playing her assigned role as victim. Tyler's response revealed both his inability to back down from a challenge and his fundamental misunderstanding of what he was facing. "You know what, Miss Rodriguez? I think you need to learn some respect yourself. Maybe David here can watch while I teach you how things really work." The threat was explicit enough that Emma felt justified in what she was about to do, but it was Tyler's movement toward her that eliminated any remaining doubt about her course of action. He lunged forward with the kind of wild, undisciplined attack that characterized people who had never faced genuine resistance, his right hand drawn back in preparation for a punch that would have been devastating if it had connected with someone who wasn't prepared for it. Emma's response was so swift and controlled that most students didn't immediately understand what they were witnessing. She stepped slightly to her left, allowing Tyler's momentum to carry him past her while she caught his extended arm in a grip that looked casual but immediately immobilized his ability to throw effective punches. A subtle shift in her positioning and a precise application of leverage sent Tyler stumbling forward, off balance and confused about how his certain victory had suddenly become uncertain footing. "Tyler," Emma said conversationally, maintaining her grip on his arm while he struggled to regain his balance, "this is your last opportunity to de-escalate this situation. I strongly recommend you take it." The casual competence with which Emma had neutralized Tyler's attack created a moment of stunned silence in the classroom. Students who had spent weeks watching their quiet English teacher absorb harassment without response were now seeing her demonstrate capabilities that none of them had imagined she possessed. Tyler himself seemed most shocked of all, staring at Emma with the kind of confusion that came from having fundamental assumptions about reality suddenly proven wrong. "Let go of me," Tyler demanded, trying to jerk his arm free and discovering that Emma's grip was far stronger than her appearance had suggested. "What are you doing? You can't put your hands on students." Emma's smile was patient, but carried undertones that made Tyler's struggles to escape more frantic. "I'm defending myself and my students from someone who just threatened us with physical violence. I'm pretty sure the administration will understand my position when they review Jake's video." The mention of the video that Jake had been so eager to create caused a ripple of realization through the classroom. Tyler's group had documented their own harassment campaign, creating evidence that would support Emma's account of events when administrators inevitably became involved. Jake himself seemed to realize this, his phone wavering as he considered whether continuing to film was in his best interests. Tyler's second attempt to attack Emma revealed the depth of his miscalculation about who he was dealing with. He tried to throw a left-handed punch while his right arm remained controlled, but Emma simply adjusted her positioning and applied pressure to specific points on his trapped limb that caused him to gasp in pain and abandon his offensive efforts. "That's a pressure point technique," Emma said calmly, as if she were explaining a literary concept to her class. "Very useful for controlling aggressive behavior without causing permanent damage. I learned it during my years training in mixed martial arts." The revelation hit the classroom like a thunderbolt, suddenly recontextualizing everything students thought they knew about their quiet English teacher. Emma Rodriguez, the woman who spoke in whispers and seemed to shrink away from confrontation, had just casually mentioned years of martial arts training while demonstrating her ability to control Tyler Brooks, Lincoln High's most physically intimidating student. Madison's gasp was audible across the classroom. "Mixed martial arts? You mean like UFC fighting?" Emma's nod was matter-of-fact, as if she were confirming her teaching credentials rather than revealing a completely hidden aspect of her identity. "Professional, MA, actually. I competed for several years before retiring to pursue education. My fighting name was Silent Storm." The nickname seemed to unlock something in Jake's memory, and his eyes widened with recognition. "Silent Storm Rodriguez? You're Silent Storm Rodriguez? I watched your fights on YouTube. You submitted Jessica Martinez in the second round at the Desert Storm Championship." The confirmation that their teacher was not only a trained fighter, but a recognizable name in professional combat sports, created a wave of excited whispers throughout the classroom. Students began pulling out phones to search for Emma's fighting videos. Their perception of her transformed entirely within moments. Tyler himself had stopped struggling against her grip, apparently stunned by the revelation that he had been systematically harassing someone capable of seriously injuring him. "That's impossible," Madison said, though her voice carried more uncertainty than conviction. "Miss Rodriguez doesn't look like a fighter. She's so quiet and small." Emma's laugh carried genuine warmth for the first time in weeks. "Size doesn't determine fighting ability, Madison. Neither does personality. Some of the most dangerous people I've known have been quiet and unassuming. They understand that real strength doesn't need to announce itself." David Park's voice carried clearly across the classroom, filled with awe and vindication. "That's why you never got upset when Tyler was being mean to you. You knew you could stop him anytime you wanted to." Emma's expression grew more serious as she addressed David's observation. "I chose not to use violence because I believe in solving problems peacefully whenever possible. My martial arts training taught me that fighting should be a last resort, used only when someone is in genuine danger." The philosophical explanation seemed to confuse Tyler, who was clearly struggling to reconcile Emma's demonstrated fighting ability with her previous passive responses to his harassment. "If you could have stopped me this whole time, why didn't you? Why did you let me? Why didn't you do something?" The vulnerability in Tyler's question revealed a level of self-awareness that surprised Emma. For the first time since their conflict began, he seemed to recognize the genuine cruelty of his behavior rather than viewing it as harmless entertainment. Emma considered her response carefully, understanding that this moment represented an opportunity for education that might be more valuable than any literary lesson she had ever taught. "Because I hoped you would choose to be better than this," Emma said, finally releasing Tyler's arm and stepping back to give him space. "I believed that if I didn't escalate the situation, you might eventually realize that hurting people for entertainment isn't something to be proud of." Tyler rubbed his arm where Emma had controlled it, his expression cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. The confident swagger that had characterized his behavior for weeks was completely gone, replaced by the uncertain posture of someone who had discovered that their understanding of the world was fundamentally flawed. "I don't understand," Tyler said, his voice much quieter than usual. "If you're some kind of famous fighter, why are you teaching high school English? Why are you here instead of, I don't know, fighting in the UFC or something?" Emma's answer revealed depths of character that even David hadn't suspected. "Because I realize that the most important battles aren't fought in cages for entertainment. They're fought in classrooms and communities, helping people become better versions of themselves. I retired from fighting to become a teacher because I wanted to use my strength to build people up instead of breaking them down." The explanation seemed to impact Tyler more powerfully than any physical technique Emma had demonstrated. He stared at her with the kind of confusion that came from having fundamental assumptions about strength, weakness, and personal value suddenly challenged by someone who had chosen service over glory. Emma returned to her position behind her desk, her demeanor shifting back toward the patient teacher persona that her students recognized, though everyone in the room understood that something fundamental had changed. The careful balance of power that had characterized their classroom interactions had been permanently altered, not through intimidation or revenge, but through the revelation of truths that cast previous events in an entirely new light. "Now," Emma said, her voice returning to its characteristic gentle tone, "I believe we were discussing conflict resolution in literature before we became involved in our own conflict resolution process. Tyler, Madison, Jake, would you be willing to share your thoughts on how the characters in today's story might have handled their situation differently?" The attempt to return to normal classroom activities after such a dramatic revelation created a surreal atmosphere that none of the students seemed prepared to navigate. Tyler, Madison, and Jake exchanged uncertain glances, clearly struggling to process how their roles had shifted from aggressors to students, seeking guidance from someone they had been systematically underestimating. Emma's phone continued buzzing, with notifications from the spreading videos of their confrontation, but the context had changed completely. Instead of documenting her humiliation, Jake's footage had captured the moment when Lincoln High's quietest teacher revealed herself to be a professional athlete who had chosen education over fame, restraint over retaliation, and teaching over fighting. The remaining minutes of class passed in subdued conversation as students processed what they had witnessed and learned. Emma continued her lesson with professional composure, but everyone in the room understood that the dynamics of their relationships had been permanently altered. Tyler's campaign of harassment had ended not through administrative intervention or social pressure, but through the discovery that his chosen victim possessed capabilities that he had never imagined. As the bell rang ending the class period, students gathered their belongings with unusual quiet, many of them stealing glances at Emma as if seeing her for the first time. Tyler lingered near his desk, clearly wanting to say something but struggling to find words appropriate for the situation. Madison and Jake flanked him uncertainly, their confidence in their social hierarchy shaken by the revelation that power could take forms they had never considered. Emma busied herself organizing lesson plans and assignment sheets, maintaining her routine while allowing the significance of what had occurred to settle throughout the room. She had revealed aspects of herself that she had spent years concealing, potentially changing not just her relationship with these particular students, but her entire identity within the Lincoln High community. The transformation was irreversible, and Emma found herself curious about what would come next. She had chosen teaching specifically to leave her fighting identity behind, but today's events had demonstrated that some aspects of who we are cannot be completely discarded. The challenge now would be integrating these revealed truths into her ongoing mission of education and personal growth, both for herself and for the students who would undoubtedly see her differently from this moment forward. The aftermath of Emma's revelation spread through Lincoln High School like wildfire over the following days, transforming not only how students viewed their quiet English teacher, but also how they understood the nature of strength itself. By Thursday morning, Jake's original harassment video had been completely overshadowed by footage of Emma's controlled response to Tyler's attack, with students throughout the school sharing clips of their teacher's professional fighting highlights, alongside commentary about her choice to become an educator. Emma arrived at school to find her parking spot surrounded by students who had gathered to catch glimpses of the woman they now knew as Silent Storm Rodriguez. The attention was uncomfortable for someone who had spent years cultivating anonymity, but Emma noticed that the quality of the attention had changed dramatically. Instead of the pity or dismissive glances she had grown accustomed to, students looked at her with genuine respect and curiosity about her story. Principal Sarah Johnson had requested a meeting with Emma first thing Thursday morning, and as Emma walked through the hallways toward the administrative offices, she could hear whispered conversations about her fighting career and speculation about why she had chosen teaching over continued professional competition. The transformation in her reputation was so complete that some students who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully as she passed, while others openly stared with the kind of fascination usually reserved for celebrities. The principal's office felt different when Emma entered it that morning, partly because she was no longer the powerless victim seeking help with harassment, but also because Principal Johnson's demeanor had shifted from patronizing sympathy to genuine professional respect. Sarah Johnson was a woman in her early 50s who had spent decades in education, and she possessed the kind of intuitive understanding of human nature that made her effective at managing the complex dynamics of a large high school. Emma, Principal Johnson said, gesturing toward the chairs arranged around her desk. "I think we need to discuss what happened in your classroom yesterday. I've reviewed the video footage that several students shared, and I want to understand your perspective on the situation." Emma had prepared for this conversation, understanding that her actions, while justified, had crossed boundaries between teacher and student that required careful explanation. She had spent the previous evening reviewing her own mental footage of the incident, analyzing her responses and preparing to defend her choices to administrators who might not fully understand the circumstances that had led to her revealing her combat training. "Tyler Brooks physically attacked me after I intervened to protect David Park from what appeared to be imminent assault," Emma said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had emerged during yesterday's confrontation. "I used minimal force to control the situation and prevent injury to any student, including Tyler himself." Principal Johnson nodded thoughtfully, her expression suggesting that she had already reached similar conclusions about the incident. "I've spoken with several students who were present, and their accounts consistently support your description of events. What I'm more interested in understanding is your background and how it relates to your current position here at Lincoln High." The question Emma had been dreading was delivered with professional courtesy rather than accusation, but she understood that her response would likely determine whether she would be allowed to continue teaching at Lincoln High. The revelation of her fighting career had created complications that extended far beyond the immediate incident with Tyler's group, potentially affecting her relationships with students, parents, and colleagues. "I competed professionally in mixed martial arts for several years before retiring due to injury and a desire to pursue education," Emma explained, maintaining eye contact with Principal Johnson while choosing her words carefully. "I chose not to disclose this background when I was hired because I wanted to be evaluated based on my teaching abilities rather than my previous career." Principal Johnson's smile was understanding rather than disapproving. "Emma, I've been in education for over 20 years, and I've learned that teachers bring all kinds of experiences to their classrooms. What matters isn't what you did before becoming a teacher, but how you use those experiences to benefit your students." The supportive response was unexpected, and Emma felt some of the tension she had been carrying since yesterday's incident begin to ease. She had been prepared to defend her actions and potentially face disciplinary measures, but Principal Johnson seemed more interested in understanding how Emma's unique background might actually enhance her effectiveness as an educator. "I've received several calls from parents since yesterday," Principal Johnson continued, "but they weren't complaints about your behavior. They were expressions of gratitude that their children have a teacher who was willing to put herself at risk to protect students from harm. David Park's parents in particular wanted me to know how much they appreciate your intervention on their son's behalf." Emma's surprise at this information must have shown on her face, because Principal Johnson's expression grew more serious as she continued. "Emma, what you did yesterday was exactly what we hope all our teachers would do when students are in danger. You used your training to protect rather than harm. You de-escalated a dangerous situation, and you provided an object lesson about the difference between strength and violence that will benefit every student who witnessed it." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering topics ranging from Emma's teaching philosophy to her plans for integrating her martial arts background into educational opportunities for students. Principal Johnson was particularly interested in Emma's thoughts about starting a self-defense program or martial arts club that could help students develop confidence and discipline while learning practical safety skills. "I think your unique background could be a tremendous asset to our school community," Principal Johnson concluded. "But I also understand that your privacy has been compromised, and you may need time to adjust to having this aspect of your life become public knowledge." Emma's response reflected the clarity that had emerged from yesterday's confrontation. "I've realized that hiding who I am wasn't protecting anyone, including myself. If my experience can help students understand that, Strength comes in many forms, and that real power lies in choosing how to use your abilities. Then I'm willing to be more open about my background. The meeting ended with Emma feeling more supported than she had since arriving at Lincoln High, but also aware that her role within the school community was about to change dramatically. As she walked back toward her classroom, Emma encountered Tyler Brooks waiting by her door with an expression that combined embarrassment, curiosity, and something that might have been genuine remorse. Tyler's physical presence hadn't changed since their confrontation, but his demeanor was completely different. The arrogant confidence that had characterized his behavior for months was gone, replaced by the uncertain posture of someone who had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his actions. He looked younger somehow, as if the revelation of Emma's capabilities had stripped away protective delusions about his own invincibility. "Miss Rodriguez," Tyler said, his voice lacking the mockery that had previously characterized his interactions with Emma. "Could I talk to you for a minute? I mean, if you have time." Emma unlocked her classroom door and gestured for Tyler to follow her inside, curious about what he wanted to discuss, but prepared for anything from apology to continued defiance. She had learned during her fighting career that people responded to defeat in various ways, and Tyler's behavior over the next few minutes would reveal important information about his character and capacity for growth. Tyler stood uncertainly near the door while Emma organized materials for her first period class, clearly struggling with how to begin whatever conversation he had planned. The silence stretched between them until Emma took the initiative, her voice carrying the same patient tone she used with students who were grappling with difficult concepts. "What's on your mind, Tyler?" The simple question seemed to unlock something in Tyler's carefully constructed defenses, and his words came out in a rush of confusion and self-recrimination. "I don't understand why you didn't just tell me to." "Stop. I mean, if you could have handled me from the beginning, why did you let me treat you like that for so long?" Emma's response was thoughtful and educational, reflecting her commitment to helping students learn from their experiences rather than simply punishing them for poor choices. "Because I hoped you would realize on your own that what you were doing was wrong. I believed that if I didn't escalate the situation, you might eventually choose to be better than your behavior suggested." Tyler's confusion was evident in his expression and posture. "But I made those videos. I embarrassed you in front of the whole school. I called you names and tried to make you look stupid. Why would you give me chances to be better when I was being such a jerk?" The question revealed depths of self-awareness that Emma hadn't expected from Tyler, suggesting that yesterday's events had prompted genuine self-reflection rather than simple embarrassment at being outmaneuvered. Emma recognized this as a teachable moment that could potentially transform Tyler's understanding of power, respect, and personal responsibility. "Because I've learned that people often behave badly when they're struggling with their own insecurities or pain," Emma said, settling into her desk chair and gesturing for Tyler to sit as well. "Your behavior toward me wasn't really about me at all. It was about your need to feel powerful and important, which suggested to me that you might not feel very powerful or important in other areas of your life." Tyler's defensive response was immediate but lacked the venom that had characterized his previous interactions with Emma. "I'm not insecure. I'm the starting quarterback. I have a girlfriend. I have more followers on social media than most people in this school." Emma's smile was gentle but knowing. "And yet you felt the need to gain more followers by humiliating a teacher who had never done anything to harm you. That suggests that what you have isn't making you feel as secure as you think it should." The observation hit Tyler like a physical blow, and Emma could see him struggling to process this new perspective on his behavior. His defensive posture gradually softened as he considered the implications of what she was suggesting, his understanding of his own motivations becoming more complex and uncomfortable. "I never thought about it like that," Tyler admitted, his voice much quieter than usual. "I just thought, I don't know, I thought it would be funny. I thought people would think I was cool for messing with you." Emma's response was educational, rather than judgmental, reflecting her commitment to helping students learn from their mistakes, rather than simply condemning them for poor choices. Humor at someone else's expense isn't really humor, Tyler. It's cruelty disguised as entertainment. Real confidence doesn't require making other people feel small. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics ranging from Tyler's family pressures to his fears about college recruitment and his uncertain future beyond high school football. Emma listened with the same patient attention she gave to all her students, recognizing that Tyler's behavior had stemmed from anxiety and insecurity rather than inherent malice. When Tyler finally left her classroom, his parting words reflected a level of maturity that Emma hadn't seen from him before. "Miss Rodriguez, I'm sorry for everything I did to you. I know saying sorry doesn't erase it, but I want you to know that I understand now that what I did was wrong, really wrong." Emma's response was characteristically gracious. "Thank you for the apology, Tyler. What matters most now is what you do going forward. You have the opportunity to use this experience to become a better person and a better leader for your classmates." The morning's first period class proceeded with an energy and engagement that Emma had never experienced before at Lincoln High. Students who had previously been passive observers of her lessons were now actively participating in discussions, asking thoughtful questions, and demonstrating a level of respect that went far beyond mere compliance with classroom rules. David Park arrived early and approached Emma's desk with a confidence that was new for him. "Miss Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday. Not just for protecting me, but for showing everyone that strength isn't about being the biggest or loudest person in the room." Emma's response reflected her understanding of the broader implications of yesterday's events. "David, your courage in standing up for what was right is what made everything else possible. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is speak up when we see injustice, even when it's scary." The conversation with David was interrupted by the arrival of Madison Wells, who approached Emma's desk with obvious nervousness. Madison's usual confident demeanor was replaced by uncertain body language that suggested genuine discomfort with the conversation she was about to initiate. "Miss Rodriguez," Madison said, her voice lacking the cruel edge that had characterized her previous interactions with Emma, "I owed you an apology. I was part of what Tyler was doing, and I know that was wrong. I'm sorry for how we treated you." Emma's response to Madison was similar to her conversation with Tyler, focusing on education and growth rather than punishment or recrimination. "Madison, I appreciate your apology. What I'd like to understand is why you chose to participate in behavior that you now recognize was wrong." Madison's answer revealed complexities in her character that Emma hadn't previously suspected. "I guess I thought that if I was mean to other people, it would make me look stronger. Like, if I could make other people feel bad, then I must be better than them." The insight was more sophisticated than Emma had expected from Madison, suggesting that yesterday's events had prompted genuine self-reflection among all the students involved. Emma recognized this as an opportunity to help Madison understand healthier ways of building self-esteem and social connection. "Real strength comes from building others up, not tearing them down," Emma explained. "The most powerful people I've known have been those who use their influence to help others succeed rather than to make themselves feel superior." The conversation with Madison continued throughout the break between classes, covering topics ranging from social media culture to peer pressure and the difference between popularity and respect. Emma was struck by Madison's genuine desire to understand her own behavior and make different choices going forward. Jake Martinez's approach to Emma was different from both Tyler and Madison, characterized by a mixture of professional curiosity and personal embarrassment. Jake had always been more interested in creating content than in personally attacking Emma, but his documentation of the harassment campaign had made him complicit in the cruelty that had characterized Tyler's behavior. "Miss Rodriguez, Jake," sighed, his usual confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. "I want to apologize for filming everything. I was so focused on creating viral content that I didn't think about how it would affect you as a person." Emma's response to Jake focused on the ethical implications of social media and the responsibility that came with the ability to broadcast content to large audiences. "Jake, you have real talent for creating engaging content. The question is whether you want to use that talent to build people up or tear them down." The conversation with Jake evolved into a discussion about the potential for using social media platforms to promote positive messages and educational content. Emma was intrigued by Jake's technical skills and his genuine enthusiasm for creating content that could reach large audiences. "What if we collaborated on some educational videos?" Emma suggested. "You could use your filming and editing skills to create content that helps other students, rather than content that humiliates them." Jake's excitement at this possibility was immediate and genuine. "That would be amazing. I've always wanted to create content that actually mattered, not just stuff that gets views because it's mean or controversial." The remainder of the school day passed with a series of similar conversations as students throughout Lincoln High processed the implications of Emma's revelation and their own roles in the events that had led to it. Emma found herself serving as counselor, mentor, and educator in ways that went far beyond her original job description. But she recognized that these conversations were among the most important teaching she had ever done. The final bell of the day brought Emma a moment of quiet reflection in her empty classroom. She stood at the window overlooking the student parking lot, watching Tyler, Madison, and Jake walk together toward Tyler's truck with body language that suggested genuine friendship rather than the hierarchical dynamic that had previously characterized their relationship. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from her former coach Rob Santos, who had apparently seen the viral videos of yesterday's incident. "Saw the news about your classroom adventure. Proud of you for using your training to protect rather than harm. You've become exactly the kind of warrior I always hoped you would be." The message brought tears to Emma's eyes as she realized that her journey from professional fighter to educator had finally reached a point of integration. She no longer needed to choose between her fighting identity and her teaching identity, because she had discovered that both were expressions of the same fundamental commitment to protecting and serving others. Emma's evening routine that day included a phone call to Principal Johnson about organizing a school-wide assembly on bullying prevention and conflict resolution. The principal's enthusiasm for the project was immediate and genuine, recognizing that Emma's unique background and recent experience had created an opportunity to address these issues with unprecedented authenticity and impact. The assembly took place the following Friday in Lincoln High's main auditorium, with Emma standing before an audience of over 1,000 students, faculty, and parents. Her presentation began with clips from her professional fighting career, showing her victories and defeats in the cage, but quickly evolved into a discussion about the difference between strength and violence, power and cruelty. "I spent years learning to fight," Emma told the assembled crowd. "But the most important lesson I learned was when not to fight. Real strength isn't about being able to hurt other people. It's about being able to protect them, including protecting them from our own worst impulses." The presentation continued with testimonials from Tyler, Madison, and Jake about their experiences with bullying behavior and their commitment to making different choices going forward. David Park spoke about the courage required to stand up for others and the importance of supporting classmates who were being targeted by harassment. Emma's conclusion focused on the potential for personal transformation and the power of choosing to be better than our worst moments. "We all have the capacity for both cruelty and kindness, weakness and strength. What defines us isn't our capabilities, but how we choose to use them." The assembly ended with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, but Emma was most moved by the individual conversations that followed. Students who had been victims of bullying thanked her for giving them hope that things could change. Former bullies asked for guidance about making amends and building healthier relationships. Parents expressed gratitude for Emma's commitment to creating a safer school environment, while fellow teachers sought advice about implementing similar programs in their own classrooms. The response was overwhelming but affirming, confirming Emma's belief that her experience could serve a purpose beyond her own personal journey. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez stood in her classroom at the end of another school day, but the environment was completely different from the one she had inhabited during her first year at Lincoln High. The walls were decorated with student artwork and motivational posters, while the bulletin boards displayed essays about personal growth and overcoming challenges. Tyler Brooks had become one of Emma's most dedicated students, using his social media following to promote anti-bullying messages and educational content. Madison Wells had started a peer counseling program that helped students navigate social conflicts before they escalated into harassment. Jake Martinez had developed a series of documentary videos about student success stories that were shown throughout the district. David Park had blossomed into a confident young man who served as a mentor for younger students who struggled with social anxiety and academic pressure. His transformation from victim to advocate had been one of the most rewarding aspects of Emma's experience at Lincoln High. Emma's martial arts background had become an integral part of her teaching identity rather than a hidden aspect of her past. She taught self-defense classes after school, mentored students who were interested in martial arts, and served as a consultant for other schools dealing with bullying issues. The integration of Emma's fighting background with her educational mission had created opportunities she had never imagined when she first chose teaching as a career. She had discovered that her most important battles were indeed fought in classrooms rather than cages, helping students develop the kind of strength that would serve them throughout their lives. As Emma locked her classroom door and walked toward the parking lot, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The transformation from Silent Storm Rodriguez to Emma Rodriguez, educator and mentor, had been completed not through hiding her past but through integrating it into a larger purpose. The young woman who had once earned her living through controlled violence had become someone who used her strength to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than harm, and to teach rather than defeat. Emma Rodriguez had finally discovered what it meant to be truly powerful, the ability to choose compassion over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and service over self-interest. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Miss Rodriguez, just wanted you to know that the video I posted about your assembly has over 100,000 views. People are really inspired by your story. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." Emma smiled as she read the message, understanding that her impact would extend far beyond Lincoln High School through the students she had taught and the lessons they would carry forward. The quiet English teacher had become exactly what she had always been meant to be, a warrior who fought for others rather than against them, using her strength to create rather than destroy. The story of Emma Rodriguez served as a reminder that true power lies not in our ability to harm others, but in our choice to help them become better versions of themselves. Sometimes the most important victories are won not through force, but through the patient cultivation of understanding, respect, and genuine human connection. 3 weeks after the classroom confrontation that had changed everything at Lincoln High School, Emma Rodriguez found herself standing before a packed auditorium at the California State Education Conference, preparing to deliver a keynote address about conflict resolution and character development in educational settings. The invitation had come from administrators who had heard about her unique approach to handling student harassment, and Emma had accepted despite her natural preference for staying out of the spotlight. The audience consisted of hundreds of teachers, principals, and education officials from across the state, all eager to learn from someone who had successfully transformed a toxic classroom dynamic into an opportunity for genuine learning and growth. Emma looked out at the sea of faces, many of them showing the kind of exhaustion that came from dealing with increasingly complex student behavioral issues without adequate resources or support. Emma's presentation began with a video montage that Jake Martinez had created, showing highlights from her professional fighting career, interspersed with footage from her current teaching practice. The contrast was striking. Images of Emma in fighting gear, throwing powerful strikes and executing complex submission holds, followed by clips of her patiently explaining literary concepts to engage students or mediating conflicts between former enemies who had learned to respect each other. Many of you are probably wondering how someone goes from getting paid to fight in cages to choosing to work with teenagers for a fraction of the salary. Emma began, her voice carrying easily across the large auditorium. The answer is simple. I discovered that the most important battles aren't fought for prize money or championships. They're fought in classrooms and hallways, in the hearts and minds of young people who are still figuring out who they want to become. The audience's attention was immediate and complete, drawn in by Emma's authentic presence and the obvious passion she brought to discussing education. Unlike many conference speakers who relied on theoretical frameworks and abstract concepts, Emma grounded her presentation in specific, real-world experiences that resonated with educators who face similar challenges every day. Emma continued by describing the systematic harassment campaign that Tyler's group had conducted, the viral video attempts, and her own internal struggle between her fighting instincts and her educational principles. She was careful to protect her students' privacy while still providing enough detail to help the audience understand the complexity of the situation she had navigated. The hardest part wasn't dealing with the students who were harassing me, Emma explained. It was choosing not to use the skills I had spent years developing when using them would have been so much easier than finding a teaching solution. Every day I chose restraint. I was also choosing to believe that these students could learn to be better than their worst behaviors. The presentation moved into a detailed analysis of the incident itself, with Emma explaining her decision-making process and the specific techniques she had used to control Tyler's attack while minimizing harm to everyone involved. She emphasized the importance of understanding the difference between self-defense and retaliation, between protecting others and seeking revenge. When I finally revealed my fighting background, it wasn't because I wanted to intimidate or punish anyone, Emma said. It was because the situation had escalated to the point where someone was going to get hurt, and I had the ability to prevent that harm. The revelation of my capabilities became a teaching moment about the responsible use of power and the importance of choosing when and how to intervene in dangerous situations. The audience was particularly interested in the aftermath of the incident and how Emma had worked with Tyler, Madison, and Jake to transform their understanding of strength, respect, and personal responsibility. Emma shared specific examples of conversations she had with each student, showing how she had helped them process their behavior and make different choices going forward. The goal was never to shame or punish these students for their mistakes, Emma explained. It was to help them understand the impact of their actions and give them the tools to build healthier relationships with their peers. Punishment might have stopped the immediate behavior, but education gave them the opportunity to become genuinely better people. Emma's presentation included a video call with Tyler Brooks, who was now a senior at Lincoln High and had become one of the school's most effective anti-bullying advocates. Tyler appeared on the large screen behind Emma, his confidence now channeled into positive leadership rather than destructive behavior. Miss Rodriguez didn't just stop me from bullying her, Tyler told the audience. She helped me understand why I was doing it in the first place and gave me better ways to feel good about myself. Instead of trying to make other people feel small, I learned to help them feel bigger. It's made me happier than I ever was when I was being mean to people. Madison Wells joined the video call from her college dorm room where she was studying. psychology with the goal of becoming a school counselor. Her transformation from cruel popular girl to empathetic helper had been one of the most dramatic changes to emerge from Emma's intervention. I used to think that being powerful meant making other people afraid of me, Madison said to the conference audience. Miss Rodriguez showed me that real power comes from helping others feel safe and valued. Now I'm studying to become the kind of counselor who can help students before they make the same mistakes I made. Jake Martinez appeared on screen from his internship at a local television station, where he was creating educational content for a program that would be distributed to schools throughout California. His technical skills, once used to document cruelty for entertainment, were now focused on producing materials that promoted empathy and understanding. Miss Rodriguez taught me that having the ability to reach people through media comes with responsibility, Jake explained. Now I try to create content that builds people up instead of tearing them down. It's way more rewarding than anything I did when I was just trying to get views. The video calls concluded with David Park, who had graduated from Lincoln High the previous year and was now studying education at UC Berkeley with the goal of becoming a teacher himself. David's transformation from victim to advocate had been profound, and his perspective on the incident provided insight into how students experienced and learned from Emma's intervention. When Miss Rodriguez stood up for me, she wasn't just protecting me from Tyler, David said. She was showing me and everyone else in that room that it's possible to be strong without being cruel, to have power without using it to hurt people. That lesson changed how I see myself and how I interact with everyone around me. After the video calls ended, Emma opened the floor for questions from the conference audience. The responses revealed the depth of interest and concern that educators had about handling similar situations in their own schools and classrooms. A high school principal from San Diego asked about the legal implications of Emma's actions and how administrators could support teachers who found themselves in similar situations. Emma's response emphasized the importance of clear policies about self-defense and student protection, as well as the need for administrative support when teachers had to make split-second decisions about student safety. A middle school teacher from Sacramento wanted to know how Emma had managed to maintain her educational mission while dealing with systematic harassment. Emma's answer focused on the importance of having a clear sense of purpose and the support systems that had helped her stay focused on her goals even when facing significant personal challenges. Several teachers asked about incorporating martial arts or self-defense training into their professional development, and Emma discussed the value of understanding conflict de-escalation techniques even for educators who had no intention of using physical intervention. The confidence that came from knowing how to handle dangerous situations often prevented those situations from arising in the first place. The most emotional question came from a young teacher who had recently experienced bullying from her own students and was struggling with feelings of powerlessness and inadequacy. Emma's response was both practical and deeply compassionate, acknowledging the difficulty of the teacher's situation while providing concrete strategies for rebuilding classroom authority and student respect. The students who target teachers are usually the ones who are struggling the most with their own sense of powerlessness, Emma explained. When we respond with empathy rather than anger, when we set clear boundaries while still showing that we care about their success, we give them the opportunity to see us as allies rather than enemies. Emma's presentation concluded with a call to action for educators to consider their own hidden strengths and how those capabilities could be integrated into their teaching practice. She emphasized that everyone had something unique to offer their students, whether it was previous career experience, personal challenges they had overcome, or skills they had developed outside of education. I spent years hiding my fighting background because I thought it wasn't relevant to teaching, Emma said. What I learned is that our students benefit from seeing us as complete human beings with complex histories and diverse capabilities. When we're authentic about who we are, we give them permission to be authentic about who they're becoming. The standing ovation that followed Emma's presentation lasted for several minutes, but what moved her most were the individual conversations that took place afterward. Teachers shared their own stories of student challenges and personal struggles, many of them expressing gratitude for Emma's willingness to be vulnerable about her own journey. A veteran teacher from Los Angeles approached Emma with tears in her eyes, explaining that she had been considering leaving education due to increasingly difficult student behavior and lack of administrative support. Emma's presentation had reminded her of why she had chosen teaching in the first place, and given her new strategies for reconnecting with students who seemed unreachable. A young male teacher shared his own experience with student harassment and his struggle to maintain authority in his classroom without resorting to punitive measures that violated his educational philosophy. Emma's example had shown him that there were ways to be strong and compassionate simultaneously, setting boundaries while still showing care for student growth and development. Several administrators asked Emma to consider consulting with their districts about implementing comprehensive anti-bullying programs based on her experiences at Lincoln High. The interest was gratifying but also overwhelming, as Emma realized that her story had touched on issues that educators across the state were grappling with every day. The conference experience reinforced Emma's understanding that her journey from professional fighter to educator had prepared her not just to handle her own classroom challenges, but to help other teachers navigate similar difficulties. The integration of her fighting background with her educational mission had created a unique perspective that could benefit students and educators far beyond Lincoln High School. Returning to Riverside after the conference, Emma found Lincoln High buzzing with excitement about the positive attention the school had received as a result of her presentation. Principal Johnson had been contacted by education reporters, parent groups, and other schools interested in learning more about their approach to student conflict resolution. The success of Emma's anti-bullying initiatives had also attracted the attention of the district superintendent, who asked Emma to develop a curriculum that could be implemented across all schools in the district. The project would involve training other teachers in conflict de-escalation techniques, while also creating educational materials for students about healthy relationship building and personal responsibility. Emma's own classroom had become a model for other teachers who wanted to create environments where students felt safe to take intellectual risks and express themselves authentically. The transformation in her students' engagement and academic performance had been remarkable, with test scores improving dramatically and classroom disruptions becoming virtually non-existent. Tyler Brooks had become something of a celebrity within the school, not for his football skills, but for his leadership and anti-bullying efforts. His social media presence, once focused on cruel entertainment, now promoted messages of kindness and inclusion that reached thousands of followers across the state. Madison Wells had started a peer mediation program that helped students resolve conflicts before they escalated into harassment or violence. Her natural charisma, once used to enforce cruel social hierarchies, was now channeled into helping classmates build supportive relationships and navigate social challenges. Jake Martinez had launched a student-run media program that documented positive stories from throughout the school district. His technical skills and creative vision were being recognized by professional organizations, and he had received scholarship offers from several universities with strong film programs. David Park had emerged as a confident leader who mentored younger students and served as a bridge between different social groups within the school. His academic success had continued, but more importantly, he had developed the kind of social confidence that would serve him well in college and beyond. The ripple effects of Emma's intervention had extended far beyond the original participants, influencing the entire culture of Lincoln High School. Students who had never been directly involved in the incident had learned valuable lessons about standing up for others, using their capabilities responsibly, and finding strength through service rather than dominance. Emma's personal life had also been transformed by the revelation of her fighting background and her emergence as a public figure in education. She had reconnected with several former training partners and opponents who had expressed admiration for her transition from competition to teaching. Her relationship with her former coach Rob Santos had deepened as they discussed the philosophical connections between martial arts and education. The integration of Emma's two identities had created opportunities for personal growth that she had never anticipated. She had started training again at a local MMA gym, not with the goal of competing, but as a way of maintaining her physical and mental discipline. The gym had become a place where she could process the stresses of teaching, while staying connected to the community that had shaped her understanding of strength and perseverance. Emma's story had also inspired other former athletes to consider careers in education, showing that the skills developed through competitive sports could be valuable assets in classroom settings. Several MMA gyms had started programs that connected retiring fighters with educational opportunities, recognizing that the discipline and resilience required for professional competition could translate into effective teaching. As Emma reflected on the years since her confrontation with Tyler's group, she understood that the incident had been a catalyst for discovering her authentic professional identity. The choice to reveal her fighting background had required courage, but it had also created possibilities for impact that would have been impossible if she had continued hiding aspects of herself. The quiet English teacher who had once tried to disappear into the background had become a voice for authentic education and compassionate strength. Emma Rodriguez had discovered that her greatest victory wasn't any championship she had won in the cage, but the transformation of students who had learned to see strength as a tool for building rather than destroying. Her phone buzzed with a message from a teacher in Portland who had seen her conference presentation online and wanted advice about handling a similar situation in her own classroom. Emma smiled as she typed her response, understanding that her story would continue to ripple outward, helping educators and students across the country discover their own capacity for growth and positive change. The woman who had once been known as Silent Storm had found her true calling as an educator, who helped others discover the power of choosing kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and service over self-interest. Emma Rodriguez had become exactly what the world needed, a warrior who fought for rather than against, who built up rather than tore down, and who understood that the most important victories were measured not in defeats inflicted, but in lives transformed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.